we can maintain our welfare state and be safe, but then we have to give up the climate policy, or we can be green but dead. But I'd rather be less green and alive. I propose the United States that Poland be indispensable ally, and I want my army to be the strongest in the region, potentially even stronger than the German one. You know, Russia wants to continue their imperial policy. So they react on pain, they react on strength, peace through strength. So Putin has to have two hats on in his hand: short-term Putin and long-term Putin. If he has a short-term Putin, and if he wants to be a victor, if he wants to have an immediate victory, then he will press again. But then there are more and more signals that he wants to be this one of the great tsars of Russia, of whom the books are written in 200 years from today. And to be such a person, he has to think about the longer-term development of the Russian economy. And from this point of view, he knows that the lack of access to technology, changing all the entire economy into the defense type of economy is devastating for Russia.
We're going to skip the normal introductions. This is an invitation-only event. The former Prime Minister and I want to maximize the time for a discussion of what is the critical issue today. For Poland, in many ways for the United States overseas, and certainly for Europe as a whole, if not the West as it is broadly defined. And that is the challenge posed by Russia, by Vladimir Putin, specifically but not exclusively, as it plays out in Ukraine. And the Prime Minister has had extensive experience, including during the period up to and immediately following Russia's invasion, of dealing with the issue of how to prevent, how we assessed wrongly the capacity of Ukraine to resist from the standpoint of both Putin and NATO and the West. You had a very different assessment at the time. And then most importantly, what happens now, what should be done to address the situation and the consequences for Poland, but also for all of us if it is not addressed. And I'll start by asking you, your assessment today of how best to deal with the phenomenon of Vladimir Putin, what he wants, what he is prepared to do with respect to Ukraine and more broadly Europe. Who is the man? What is he after? And what could be done to mitigate, confront, constrain those ambitions?
Right. Thanks for having me here, Ambassador, and thank you for the invitation to your great institute. To answer your question, really, I have to very briefly say what was the economic model, business model of Europe, of Western Europe. It was based mostly on five major pillars. Cheap, inexpensive labor imported from the south and then from Central Europe, unfortunately from my country as well. Then number two, cheap raw materials, natural resources imported from Russia, and this is an important element of the entire jigsaw. Cheap financing based on credibility of the Bundesbank first and then on the European Central Bank. The Pax Americana, so cheap security or almost for free security from the United States, and high margin products sold to China. And all those elements of the economic model of Europe are gone with the wind, gone with the Russian wind in particular. And this is why they all have to now, my friends and partners from Western Europe, rethink their strategy, how we are going to structure our economy now, who is going to be our major trading partner, based on what. And of course, the elephant in the room is the American policy, trade policy towards Europe. And this is in that context I start replying to your question about Putin and Russia, because at the same time we have to be aware that Putin and the Kremlin, they were so self-confident attacking Ukraine because the European economy was dependent on Russia and on China, and it didn't seem to be able to be disentangled from the Russian dependency, natural resources and cheap gas, cheaper raw materials in particular. And from that point of view, some Western European countries started to change their policy, their view on their grand strategy into the future. And this is why we are in the middle of a turbulent era in Europe of changing the grand strategy of Germany, of France, of the United Kingdom. And at the same time, there are dragging elements like the climate policy, the legacy systems dependency on Russia, which make this new grand strategy so difficult. And this is why Putin was so sure that the war will be over within 6 to 10 weeks, probably, and this is only a matter of days or weeks when the Ukraine will cease to be an independent state.
And by the way, as part of the U.S. national security structure, during those months from mid-October, before the invasion, up to the invasion itself, the uniform assessment of NATO, of the United States, matched that of the Kremlin, which was that Ukraine was governed by a thin veneer of pro-Western figures. A former television comic was the head of state. And it would not have the ability or interest in fighting because Ukrainians were Russian under this veneer. Second assumption, we all, Kremlin, the West shared. The Russian armed forces may not have been the greatest in the world, but they were capable in 6 to 10 weeks of overcoming Ukraine. So, common assessment, common judgment. Why was it wrong?
Because of this immaterial fighting spirit and immaterial hope for sovereign state, independent state, which was in the veins of the Ukrainians in particular. This was the factor number one, and it's not. It's probably not very humble what I'm going to say, but the second factor would be the support from coming from Poland to Ukraine. In the first weeks, first months, 2-3 months, Ukraine would not be able to survive without the support of Poland. Not only support through humanitarian aid, and we were at its peak. There were 5 million Ukrainians in Poland, and there are still 1.5-2 million of them. But in particular, the weapon which we've delivered to the Ukrainian soldiers, tanks, 250 tanks. And this was the decision of my government to deliver weapon quickly, because we did believe that after the first successes of the Russian army, the fighting spirit of the Ukrainian army is there, and they want to fend off those aggressors.
So that was the picture at the time of the invasion. Russia was not able to militarily achieve its objectives, save only in the Donbass, Zaporizhzhia areas of Ukraine. But Russia has conducted, since that first summer, a very different kind of campaign. Grinding military ground action, yes, but its most important campaign has been a different one, against civic infrastructure, heating, electrical power, the things that make life possible throughout Ukraine.
That is lasting till today.
Lasting literally until today, this week. How does one deal with the situation today? Not what could have been done in the past. That's gone. What can one do today to change this picture from Poland's perspective as perhaps the most exposed state in Europe to all of this, and from a broader European context? What is your view?
Well, like a couple of points how President Putin can be convinced that the Ukrainians are going to fight for a number of years ahead of us. Number one, seizing assets or some parts of assets, at least, which are frozen in the European system. $350 billion frozen for the last 3.5 years, but nothing is happening. Even the interest on those assets are not being utilized, are not used.
And for the audience, why? Why is that the case?
Before joining politics, I was a banker, or a bankster, if you want, a CEO of a bank. So I can tell you that all the banksters of Western Europe are afraid of touching this pot of gold because they know that this can be, how to say it mildly, softly, undermine the credibility of some of them in the eyes of some other dictators from other parts of the globe, which they like making deposits of their money in Switzerland, in Luxembourg, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, and they want to live off those money. I don't like it. This is why I'm criticizing this. I don't think it's fair, but those guys are better off because this system is still there. And there are lots of dictators who are doing this across the globe. And this is one factor. The other one is probably fear of Putin. They are fearful of what Putin can do, and I don't mean tactical nuclear weapons. I just mean another stage of hybrid war, attacking not only the countries of eastern flank of NATO, but also being more pervasive, no more aggressive in France, in Germany, in the Netherlands, in Belgium. They don't want it. They have enough of illegal migrants who are making terrorist attacks, and they don't want to have another wave of sabotage coming from out of Russia. So this is another factor, and yet another one. This is the reaction of the United States, and I should have said it as the first one, because this is the only, or the predominantly, this is the major factor with which President Putin is counting, and this is why what the United States is gonna do about Ukraine, the peace process, freezing conflict, freezing war, is absolutely critically important going forward. What the White House is saying is very carefully listened in the Kremlin, and this is the major factor.
Let's unpack a bit what you just outlined, and let's start with, what does Putin want in Ukraine? What is his existential requirement? His
existential requirement is to make Ukraine dependent on Russia, completely dependent. So deprive Ukraine of sovereignty. There can be this or that puppet government in Kiev, and 4 or 5 oblasti, so regions, should be incorporated into Russia.
Formally, yes.
Formally, like the Donetsk, like the Lugansk region, Zaporozhye region, Kherson region, the Crimean Peninsula, of course. So the Ukraine should be a kind of, failed state example for the rest of the Central Asian republics. Don't even try to be really independent, the Kazakhs and the Uzbeks and so on.
It's what Putin a year ago accused Lenin, the bungler, of having done, of created fake states out of what was always Russia and the Russian Empire.
This is not true. Well, we were fighting with the Ukrainians even in the 17th century when they were part of Poland. So Putin has to learn a little bit more of history, but I know he likes history a lot. But I'm a historian as well from my first education. So no, there was the Ukrainian nation. There was a very, very cruel genocide made on Poles by the Ukrainians in the western part of Ukraine. We call it the Volyn massacre, the Volyn genocide. And why was that? This was under German occupation, so the Germans take primary responsibility, but this was such a cruel type of massacre that based on the Ukrainian chauvinism and obviously there was Ukrainian attempt to create a Ukrainian state right after the First World War and during the Second World War, and after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they were absolutely thrilled having 50 million population in the Ukrainian state.
So, given that, Prime Minister, the approach taken by the administration, and I say this in a neutral, objective sense, appears to be one that is quite transactional, that the drawing of lines on a map will be enough for Putin to accept. Well, clearly, he has not accepted the drawing of those lines on a map. He has insisted on no presence of any foreign forces as guarantors or trip lines in Ukraine. What he refers to often as the root causes of the conflict, which is broadly interpreted as an independent Ukraine is the root cause of the conflict and must be eliminated to move forward. Where does this attempt at a negotiation go, given what has transpired up to the last few days, 72 hours, in Moscow with the last engagement? What happens next? What should happen next, in your view?
Well, like the major superpower and the elephant in the room is, of course, the United States, and this is this power with which Putin really counts. And I think I understand more or less the policy of the White House. They know that there is this or that form of confrontation with China coming on them, and this is why in the other parts of the globe the United States wants to have peace, and that doesn't want to be involved. Having said that, my view of this region, through the American lens, if I can use this type of oxymoron, is following. The intermarium states, like coming from the north, Finland, Sweden, and then the Baltic states, and Poland, and the Czech Republic, and Ukraine and Romania, between the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea, intermarium states, we can be a kind of Barbican of stability in this part of the globe. We just need some support from the United States. It doesn't have to be financial support. This support can be coming from the technology, delivery, purchasing of appropriate weapon, and then Poland could be a kind of indispensable ally in this part of the globe, like like South Korea is in some other part of the globe, and Israel in other. So I try to understand the policy and the interests of my interlocutors and partners, and I believe that there is no change away from the change of the American hegemonic policy lasting probably until 2018, because even President Biden, with different vocabulary, did continue the policy of President Trump from his first term, and this is why I'd like to propose, from Poland's point of view, a viable strategy going forward. Let's try to support Ukraine sufficiently for them not to lose sovereignty. Yes, okay, they might lose 20% of their territory, or even 25%. I'm very much unhappy with this. I would not accept it, but we have to count with the reality at the same time. But the most important element of the entire jigsaw coming out of the ashes of the war should be the sovereign state of Ukraine surviving this Russian aggression.
And I would take from exactly what you just said the following requirement. It isn't, I think there is wide agreement now, painful though it is, that without de facto territorial concessions, a new line on the map,
de facto,
de facto,
yeah.
This conflict, which must come to an end because of the grinding impact on Ukraine and Ukrainians, that's not the issue. The issue is, having drawn the line, what preserves the independent Ukraine you just described from Putin's certain ambition to take advantage of that new line, to wait for the appropriate moment to take the rest of Ukraine?
There are only two factors probably which would be able to create sufficient shield from yet another aggression. One is strong Ukrainian army. A strong Ukrainian army is an army of 600,000 troops or 800,000 troops. So the recent points which were discussed within the 19 points plan are okay from that point of view. But the other one is some form of guarantees from the West, and it doesn't have to be boots on the ground. It doesn't have to be the American troops or the French troops on the ground. Intelligence support through weapon delivery, and cooperation in terms of military cooperation would be sufficient, in my view, to tell the Russians that this time you can even be defeated if you attack yet again.
You made an interesting comment, which is contrary to the common wisdom, that you must have not NATO labeled, but Western European forces, French, UK, perhaps others, physically present on the ground. You don't think that's absolutely necessary?
No, I don't think. Well, I'm a realist, so I don't think it's possible. This is why I have to think that this is not necessary.
Okay.
Because where I be, in this position that if the French and the Germans and the Brits were able to really send significant number of troops, like at least 80,000, on a permanent basis, or rotating,
right.
But on a permanent basis there should be some 80,000 troops, which would be more than tripwire forces Then I would be very happy going probably on vacation to Yellowstone Park or the Arches in Utah or wherever other beautiful places on earth. But I don't believe it's possible. And this is why I think that the only proxy for this is a very strong Ukrainian army, well, like 600,000 army, with strong armies of the Central Europe not being part of Ukrainian defense directly, but being another factor discouraging Putin of attacking eastern flank of NATO.
Part of that guarantee, what must the U.S. tell Putin?
Well, I think that again, in the interest of the United States is having peace here, and having Ukraine being at least partially part of the stability system in this region. And this is why I believe that lots of American investment, which I think President Trump might want to have in Ukraine, could be a stabilizing factor for Ukraine as well. And the Ukrainians are very capable guys. What they do with drones and anti-drone systems and robots, you must have heard some stories, yes, at least, because this is why they're still surviving vis-a-vis this dominant power of thousands and thousands of tanks, Russian tanks and so on. So there could be a win-win between the recovering Ukraine and the American business having good profits out of their investment in Ukraine.
Let's switch to a different aspect of the conflict, which is the Russian probing, testing of NATO, not just Poland, but now increasingly, and in non-traceable fashion, not aircraft, quote, overflying by mistake, close quote, NATO borders or drones doing the same, but sabotage, as has recently been attributed. What should be NATO's response? What should be the U.S. response to this?
As decisive as it can be, like Turkey shot one Russian fighter.
Yes, 10 with disastrous consequences for Turkey. Yes.
I'm not so sure longer term they were so disastrous because Turkey is having its independent policy towards Russia right now. But the Russians will always try to do step-by-step strategy of probing the patience of NATO countries, of this or that NATO country, and this is why there should be some decisive response to this. Having said that, hybrid war is very dangerous, and we have to count with lots of different aspects of this war, cyber attacks in particular, which we are experiencing lots of them. And when I was prime minister, there were many of them, so I can imagine they are still there. But Putin has to understand, and the Kremlin elite has to understand that the Europe, and this is what I started with 20 minutes ago, is serious about changing their approach, their attitude towards Russia. The Wandel durch Handel policy and Energiewende and the climate policy, they all have to be dramatically changed to make Europe independent of Russian natural resources, and this is one factor. And another one is making making Europe and the European states more capable of defending themselves without the support of the United States. And here we fall in an impossible trinity. I have coined such a phrase, borrowing this from the Bob Mundell and Fleming from the 60s, those of you who studied economy know this very well. The previous impossible trinity. My impossible trinity is following. Europe has to decide on 2 out of 3 major policies, major priorities. The climate policy, which is costing us 700 to 900 billion euro per year, per annum. Maintaining welfare state is the second one, and taking our defense capabilities and capacity seriously is the third one. And I can quantify them for you, each of them, but in the interest of time, you can believe me that there is all of them cost. To change the approach towards defense, we need to invest 500 billion euro more, $500 billion more per annum, and to realize the recently agreed net zero climate policy, or 90% fit for 90, as they call it, which is eliminating CO2 emissions by 2040 by 90%. It takes additional $700 billion per annum for the entire European Union. So we can have only 2 out of 3. We can be green and safe, but then we have to eliminate significant portions of our welfare state. We can maintain our welfare state and be safe, but then we have to give up the climate policy, or we can be green but dead. But I'd rather be less green and alive.
Let's talk a bit about a bad outcome. If Putin's objectives are achieved, whether it's in a month, a year, 5 years, we've talked about Russia's, and Putin, I assure you from personal exposure to him, believes we are, all of us in the world, weak. Russia is strong. We are all impatient. Russia is endlessly patient. And we are unwilling or unable to absorb pain. Human, economic, either one. Russia only knows pain and will absorb it forever. Let's assume this goes in a bad direction for Ukraine. What's the response of Europe? What's the response of Poland to that outcome?
Well, first of all, the sanction packages do not work sufficiently strong to force Putin to change his mind. They should have been much more extensive and quick and so on. But I don't want to sound like denying myself, but saying something completely different. But the recent package of sanctions imposed by President Trump, Rosneft and Lukoil in particular, and the fleet of shadow fleet, or what you call it in English, this was a very painful move, and that's number two. Point number three is that the sanctions don't work immediately, but year after year they do make a devastating effect on the Russian economy. So Putin has to have two hats on in his hand: short-term Putin and long-term Putin. If he has a short-term Putin, and if he wants to be victor, if he wants to have an immediate victory, then he will press and press again, and he will not give up to and he will not be receptive to the proposals presented by either Brussels or the White House and so on. But then there are more and more signals that he wants to be this one of the great tsars of Russia, of whom the books are written in 200 years from today. And to be such a person, he has to think about the longer term development of the Russian economy and Russian society. And from this point of view, he knows that the lack of access to technology, the changing all the entire economy into the defense type of economy is devastating for Russia. And if the other Putin wins in him, the longer term Putin, then he might agree with an acceptable peace agreement with Ukraine. Because one other factor which he has to be fearful longer term is Siberia and China as well. Mm-hmm. And if he doesn't, then the history can describe him as a very bad Tsar who not only lost lots of spots like Armenia and Azerbaijan, Iran not defended when Israel and so on and so forth, but also lost some parts of Siberia to China and Ukraine and the Baltic states to the Western Europe and so on. So I think that there are those historical and not only immediate considerations in the Kremlin, which maybe make me too much optimistic about potentially acceptable peace. Acceptable, I mean, for the Ukrainians, for us, for the West.
And how does Europe respond to a success by Putin in Ukraine?
There is at least some part of business elites in Western Europe who would want to go back to business as usual. Mm-hmm. No doubt about this. Having said that, I have to tell you from my experience and being part of the European Council that I did realize how the approach of the elites is changing towards Russia. It was publicly revealed, so I'm not telling any secrets, but on the European Council in Versailles, in Paris, 2 weeks after the war started, President Macron and Chancellor Scholz didn't even want to talk about Ukraine, being absolutely certain that there is no independent Ukraine and there won't be any more in foreseeable future because the Russians are winning and so on. But then I realized after the following 12 months that there was a process of a mental reconstruction in the elites of Western Europe. And again, maybe I'm a bit too naive, and I try not to be in general in my life and in my political life in particular. But hopefully, there is no simple going back to the business as usual with Russia by the European elites. And also this humiliating deal signed on the golf course by Ursula von der Leyen with President Trump is bad for Europe, but at the same time it's forcing Europe to change its defense policy, its climate policy, its energy policy, and so on.
Does Europe go back on energy, specifically on natural gas?
Yeah.
There are assumptions made that Europe has learned its lesson, burned badly by Merkel's bet on essentially a Russian monopoly in terms of natural gas supplies.
Yeah.
Against our counsel, by the way, over many, many years.
Absolutely.
She persisted in this. Does Europe go back again? Should there be a Russian victory in Ukraine to reliance on Russian gas?
I hope that they will not go back to that level of reliance on the Russian gas as they used to be before. In Poland, we have reverted from when I was prime minister from being almost completely dependent on Russia to a zero dependency on Russia. We've built the Baltic pipe to Norway, LNG terminal, interconnectors, and we do not have dependency on Russia at all. We even have hopes for being an energy hub for Central Europe, for the gas coming from Texas, basically, because we have some midterm agreements with Texan companies signed when I was prime minister, and for the rest of Europe, I think that they have learned lesson, at least to some extent, that the diversification of the deliveries of natural resources is a kind of prerequisite of a security of safety, but also of safe economy going forward.
So I ask you before I turn to the audience one final question, which is a bit unfair.
Go on.
As you assess where we are likely to be a year from now, end of 2026, what is your most likely case for Ukraine?
My most likely case is that the conflict is frozen. The Russians are not winning in that sense that they are not ruling in Kiev, de facto ruling in Kiev. The rest of Ukraine, 70 or 80% of Ukraine, is an independent state with probably a new president, because President Zelensky has some difficult time right now because of the corruption scandal in particular, and there will be change. But the will of the Ukrainian nation to have their sovereign state and being part in a wider sense of the Western civilization is extremely strong as well, and this is so important for Poland as well, and for other states of the eastern part of NATO, that I believe it's still possible. Also because it's in the interest of the United States, and it is in the interest of Western Europe. It is not in the interest of Western Europe to go back to the state prior to 2014 or prior to 2022, because they know that Russia is not a reliable partner. It's an empire, unsatiable empire, which wants to dominate its direct neighborhood, and it goes against all the values, all the interests as well. Not only Polish, but also, I believe, also against the German, French. Putin lost a lot through this war as well. Like, he wanted to have Finlandization of Ukraine and Eastern Europe. He received, NATOization of Finland and
yes.
Sweden. So he
only Putin could have done this. Yes.
Yeah, exactly, absolutely. That's a great win for us as well, because Finland and Sweden is so important. So maybe it's too optimistic, but I believe it's a possible scenario, and also it's in the interest of the United States, which makes me makes this scenario probably more likely to have peace. To be able to do business with the Russians, which President Trump for sure wants, and with Ukrainians, which President Trump and his people for sure want, and there will be probably this kind of pieredyshka, as we call it, which means, I don't know how to translate it. Pieredyshka is an interim period between two wars, basically, one war and another war. But if we use this time appropriately, then there won't be another war, because the pieredyshka is conditional.
And on energy policy, where do you expect a year from now to see Europe?
Well, I've seen the Germans building LNG terminals, Brunsbüttel next to Hamburg. I've seen other LNG terminals being built. the new pipeline system from the Azerbaijan,
Yes.
Potentially even Turkmenistan from the other side of the Caspian Sea, through Turkey and the Balkan states and so on. The Krk terminal in Croatia is going to be expanded as well. When I was Prime Minister, I planned to have another LNG terminal up in Gdańsk, not only Świnoujście 1, 8 billion cubic meter, and with this other one, we could be the energy provider, gas provider, because it is more than enough for our domestic demands. So it won't be going back to the state 5 years as it used to be 5 years ago, where Western Europe imported 165 billion cubic meters from Russia. Now it's only 55, and it was only the last couple of days when the European Council took this decision that by the end of 2027,
yes.
2027, this 50 billion should be zero. Okay, even if this is not zero, if this is 10 or 20, it is a punch in the Russian.
And where
face.
is net zero?
Well, net zero is neither here nor there. It should be cancelled. It is a crazy policy in terms of, I love environment and of course, but I don't know if you know the stats, but Europe is responsible for 6.5% of CO2 emissions, and we make enormous efforts. There is carbon leakage. The industries are are going bankrupt one after another, and we are, reducing the CO2 emissions by 0.1 or 0.2% relative to the rest of the globe. At the same time, there is a huge increase of CO2 emissions by China, by India, and so on, contributing to CO2 emissions. So even if I was 100% believer in all those climate elements of the policy, which I'm not, and I'm not, there should be a common sense solution for Europe, because we have done one of the most stupid things which I can imagine. We have we have contributed to building 4 major new industries, but they are all subsidized and built through European money in China. Wind turbines, PV, solar panels, electric batteries, and electric vehicles. Now Europe is flooded by electric vehicles from China and traditional, conventional vehicles from China. So Germany, once the automotive powerhouse, is now enormously because of this stupid mistake. So I think that the climate policy is going to change, but we will probably suffer a little bit more before we come to a conclusion as the Europeans that we have to revert back. We have to change it, okay, somehow. I have changed it when I was Prime Minister, and there was much better situation with smog and so on, because we've done what needs to be done to make the air cleaner and water better and so on. But I don't see any point in eliminating industries across Europe and feeding China with European money. I just think it's nonsense.
Great. Let me turn to the audience. We have time for a few questions.
So, picking up on your last point, where would you recommend that Poland go in terms of its energy policy and natural resource development? And do you think the current policies in Poland are going in the right direction?
But I don't want to immerse too much into current politics, because I'm criticizing my successor, current Prime Minister. He's not doing the right things. But I try to reply to your question with also involving Texas into this, if you allow me for this. 12 or 13 years ago, Poland tried to be a European powerhouse in shale gas exploration. And back then, I'm not expert at all in this, but what I learned from better guys, some of them are here in this room, that the technology was not available for this level of shale gas in Poland and the structure of those and so on. But today the technology is kind of available. So I would at least test it. I would try it, because I'd rather have our own gas rather than importing this from Qatar and Algeria and God forbid from Russia again. That's item number one. Item number two, what we've done over the last decade was building a new system of interconnectors in our region, where from Poland there are pipelines going to Slovakia, the Czech Republic, Lithuania, Ukraine, and through this we could be a European hub for American gas in this part of region, in this part of Europe, in Central and Eastern Europe. Which could be again a win-win for Poland, for our neighboring countries, and for the United States. And I like such businesses where everybody wins. So that's another one. And let me mention one other aspect of the energy system as such, and this is nuclear energy. I was all for developing nuclear power plants, both the bigger one, 1.2 gigawatts, and the small modular reactors by GE Hitachi. And we were quite advanced in that process. You know, this is a long process, like the French EDF built their two last nuclear power plants in Olkiluoto in Finland and in Normandy for 19-20 years, okay? So we wanted to build ours for 13 to 15 years, and we were quite advanced, and the process has been postponed, delayed by my successor, which I regret it is happening. But at least it was not completely stopped, from what I heard. I'm a strong believer that the nuclear energy is also a energy of the future. So this kind of energy of the future, which we should use, which we should have first of all in Poland. By the way, the Germans, our Western neighbors, have closed their nuclear power plants in 2022 after the attack of Russia on Ukraine, when the gas crisis emerged. Gas crisis happened and hit Europe very, very strongly. The prices were 10 times, 1,000% higher than they used to be prior to the Russian attack. So you can imagine how inflationary it was, and how brutally it hit our economies. Yet it's difficult for me to understand why they have realized the plan till the very end, and they have completely closed their 3 nuclear power plants.
Thank you. Other questions?
So, kind of shifting gears, a bigger picture question. There was a time here, I'm thinking President Bush first, when there was concern about what the world would be like after the fall of the Soviet Union and all of that sort of thing. And people tried to put questions on the table. In fact, in his Chicken Kiev speech, which I think of all the time, about what would happen with Ukraine as an independent republic, could that create tensions on down the road, that sort of thing. So flash forward to today, I wonder if a bigger question in all this is what you need in international institutions of some sort to get people, I don't want to say good behavior because I don't know what that is, but I mean to get people to not have territorial ambitions, to have more interest in cooperation or something, Do we need something other than NATO? Is that a fair question? What would it be? I mean, how do we deal with this stuff? I mean, there are ambitious people all over the world running countries, regimes, that are going to try to take advantage of situations. And I don't feel like we have the toolbox to deal with this. That's a question for both of y'all, actually. I'd like to hear what David thinks, too.
Over to you.
Well, so,
Prime Minister.
coming out of the realist theory, I do realize that there are bad guys all around us, and they want to.
Bad girls too.
Okay, but at the same time, knowing Russia so well as the Poles know Russia, I have to say that there are growing powers like India who are not as aggressive as Russia. There are other growing powers around the globe who have not been as aggressive as Russia. And I think that I don't want to sound too much like psychologists of Russia and Putin, but I know Russian history for 1,000 years, but last 500 years after the Mongols or Tatars dominance, and they have never had strong economy. They have never had strong technology. They always had strong secret service, special services, propaganda, and army. Like Tsar Alexander III asked, "Who is your major ally? Which countries are your major ally?" He said, "I have only two: my fleet and my army." And probably this is how the Russians think till today. They might not be rich, they might not be the most technologically advanced country in the world, but they are this state of which others are fearful, are afraid of, and they want to be such a state. And this is to your question: what should happen for them to to really change this approach? I think a strong NATO and strong NATO member states and strong army in Ukraine in this part of the world would suffice, because they cannot go to other directions. Well, of course, they could try to attack some of the Central Asian states, but I don't think they would be doing this. There is more and more of Chinese influence in those states. So we are kind of close. You provoked me to think that we are kind of close to stop Russia, which could be probably for the good of the future of this great for this country, for Russia, because they have very capable people, talented people. They have fantastic, they have great. The biggest country on earth, 70 million, 90,000 square kilometers, and they have all sorts of rare earth, and they can build different industries, but simply their efforts and their resources are redirected towards attacking other countries and being different kind of empire, different to China at least, very recently. I can compare China and Russia. China is much stronger than Russia today, but Russia wants to continue their imperial policy. So they react on pain. They react on strength, peace through strength.
I would answer, the world is always going to be a challenging place. There will always be actors on a local scene doing very bad things to their people and others. Some of that is capable of mitigation, whether in a security or a humanitarian sense. Most of it is not subject to resolution in a classic sense of that word. But there are two key strategic adversaries. China, which is enormously complex and really has to be, I revert to this whenever I'm asked the question, a hybrid of approaches. You confront China on issues that China is presenting a fundamental threat to the United States or to its critical allies over. And you do it from a position of strength, and you do it with confidence, not fear. You collaborate, you cooperate with China on those areas, and there are such, always, where there is no existential confrontation, where there is a broad agreement, or at least not disagreement. And you compete vigorously with China, not just in the marketplace economically, or the world of technology and innovation and skills, but also in the world of presence and the sense of ascendant or descendant powers. We should never cede grounds psychologically to the active theater that China conducts very adroitly around the world. They are on the up, we are on the down. Much of this is posing, it's posturing. We shouldn't accede to that. Now, Russia presents a very different and much more classic challenge. And here the answer is to understand in a very pragmatic, real sense who Putin is. Putin has contempt and hate for virtually the entire world. It isn't directed at the US or NATO or the West in particular. He has a chip on his shoulder which is enormous and is now, from 91 on, 34 years maturing. His world was destroyed by the world, not just us. And then we danced on the ruins when, in his view, we collapsed the Russian economy in 1995 as an act of deliberate humiliation. How do you deal with that? You deal with it through confidence and strength. You don't seek fights. But when he presents a challenge, you respond to the challenge. Russia is in many ways, sadly, a dying country. It is a dying demographic. It's frankly a dying culture. Putin's extraordinary appeal is he evokes amongst Russians a sense of what they would like to see themselves as being. Ruskiy mir, this unique world, this unique culture and society that is different from anything else around them or elsewhere in the world. He is what most Russians are not. Russian male life expectancy drops every single year. It is the lowest by far, 65 years, of any country in the developed world and most countries in the developing world. It's dying. Putin uses that as a lever, but he uses aggression, swagger, this idea of empire. It's not Lenin, it's Alexander II, it's Catherine and Peter. This is what he evokes, but there is a way to confront this. We have not been effective in mobilizing enough tools to confront it effectively enough, and to believe Putin is wholly transactional and can be dealt with on the basis of deals, real estate, or economics is a misreading of who he is and what he wants. And we do this ultimately to our U.S. peril, as well as the perils of friends and allies around the world, and in Europe in particular. But we need not be afraid of a carefully structured, strategic addressal, either of the Chinese challenge, which is a challenge for the foreseeable future, or the Russian challenge, which is not an endless challenge, but is very real now. They may be a gasoline station with nuclear bombs, as John McCain famously said, but they do have nuclear bombs, and that is something a president has to be aware of. But it doesn't mean you have to be fearful of managing them. But I see a misreading of Putin that is fundamental. He won't settle for anything unless he is compelled not to achieve those goals. And frankly, I cannot be as optimistic as you are about what the next year will bring on this front.
Could be.
I think we have time for one more.
So, Mr. Prime Minister, you were talking about how, in your observation, that the U.S. wants to end this war because it's pivoting to China. And there's been announcements from the administration about how statements about how they want to withdraw from commanding, because currently the U.S. military controls NATO. So there's a real possibility in the future that there's going to be a NATO that is at least less American-centric. What kind of impact would that have on Europe, and in Poland in particular, if you have more European influence running NATO without U.S. oversight?
This is a theoretical concept right now, and as I said half an hour ago, speaking about my impossible trinity, there first has to be shift in redirecting resources, shift in allocation of resources in Europe, which is not happening. I know there are Zeitenwende by Olaf Scholz. There is this new plan of 500 billion euro by Friedrich Merz, but nothing is happening so far. In the United Kingdom, there are less and less soldiers. The plans for President Macron for the next 5 years is to have 10,000 more troops. What is 10,000? It's neither here nor there. Actions speak louder than words. I know that there was such a discussion exactly which you mentioned about the NATO command and so on. As of today, we are not yet in that space at all. And if you want me to be even a little bit more provocative, I would say the following. As a Pole, and you will know what I mean, I would not be very happy for the Germans to develop a powerful Wehrmacht yet again, called even Bundeswehr or whatever they call it today. But their aircraft, they didn't change the name. This was called Luftwaffe during the Second World War, and today it's being called Luftwaffe as well. So this is why I propose, forgive my statement, for the United States, that Poland be indispensable ally, and I want my army to be the strongest in the region, potentially even stronger than the German one. And if the French one is strong and the and the British is strong, then I'm very happy with this. And coming from a realist point of view, I'm not surprised that the Spain and Spanish and the Portuguese are not so much interested in this part of Europe. Okay, but the Swedes and the Finns are. Okay, so there is a chance of building strong military posture and military presence across this intermarium region, and the Germans should pay their euro for this. This would be the best solution.
But Pace, to the Prime Minister's comments, without U.S. leadership as a practical matter, neither your question, Michelle, about the world, or yours about NATO's future, it remains an indispensable factor. And the worst of all outcomes would be one in which that leadership is not only absent or significantly diminished, but is seen as shifting its views to a hyper-transactional world in which power gets supported, weakness gets ignored. Where the world is made up, I don't make reference to anyone's family history here, to killers and victims. Morals don't matter. Values are immaterial if they're even recognized. You never want to be a sucker, a loser. You want to be a killer always. That is a sad, sad prescription for the United States, for our partners and allies, and for the world as a whole. But I don't believe that is a vision or a policy which will endure in the U.S. indefinitely. I hope. And thank you all. Prime Minister, thank you very much.